My name is Renata, and I was 31 years old the morning Layla's school called to tell me her spring semester fees hadn't been paid, and that if the balance wasn't cleared by Friday, she'd be removed from her classes. I remember standing at the kitchen counter with my coffee still hot, and something in my chest just went very, very still. Because for 4 years, I had transferred $1,500 every single month into an account Marcus set up the week our divorce was finalized. Every month, without missing one. He called it the Custody Education Fund. He told his mother, his sisters, his aunts at every holiday gathering that I was finally stepping up, that I was doing right by Layla at last. And they believed him. They thanked him for it. They praised him like he'd built the thing with his own hands. What none of them had seen, what I hadn't let myself look at too closely because I trusted the arrangement and I trusted that my daughter was being taken care of, was where that money actually went. I'm not going to tell you I had it figured out before that phone call. I didn't, but I had a folder, and an attorney, and 4 years of transfer records with every date and every amount printed clean. By the time that folder opened in a room full of his family, Marcus had run out of reasonable explanations. Welcome back to channel, where quiet people let the paperwork do the talking. If you're new here, hit subscribe, and if you've ever been the one quietly holding everything together while someone else took the credit, leave a comment below. You're in the right place. There are things you learn about yourself in a divorce that you never wanted to know. You learn how long you can hold a neutral expression while a mediator reads back the terms of an agreement you didn't want to sign. You learn how much weight a signature carries when you've already stopped trusting the person across the table. And you learn very quickly that the version of you that existed inside that marriage, the version that assumed good faith, that filled in silences with generosity, that told herself he wouldn't do that, not with Layla involved, that version has to be set aside. I didn't set her aside easily, but I set her aside. My name is Renata Voss. I grew up in Fort Collins, Colorado, the oldest of 3 kids in a household that ran tight. My father was a civil engineer for the county. My mother worked part-time as a dental office administrator and managed the family books with a yellow legal pad and a mechanical pencil that she kept behind her ear from roughly October through tax season. She taught me 2 things before I left for college. Keep your own records and never let someone else be the only person who knows where the money is. I carried both of those lessons into adulthood. Whether I applied them consistently is a different story. I studied accounting at Colorado State. Not because I loved numbers exactly, but because I was good at them and I understood intuitively that being good at numbers meant never being entirely dependent on someone else's version of the truth. I graduated at 22, took a junior position at a mid-sized firm in Denver, and spent 3 years learning the distance between what a spreadsheet says and what actually happened. I met Marcus Bellamy at a work function in the spring of my 25th year. He was charming in a low-key way, not the type who commanded a room, more the type who found you in a corner of it and made you feel like the room didn't matter. He worked in sales for a medical equipment distributor.
He was good at his job.
He was organized, punctual, and he had a wide, warm family, 3 sisters, 2 parents still married after 34 years, a grandmother named Estelle who made tamales from scratch every December and called everyone Mija regardless of actual relation. I loved that family. That part is important to say plainly because it explains why, for a long time, I gave the situation more benefit of the doubt than it deserved. Marcus and I got married when I was 27. Layla arrived 14 months later, 8 pounds even, eyes already alert and watching, with a little crease between her brows that she inherited directly from her father and still has to this day. I went back to work at 11 weeks because we needed the income and because I genuinely wanted to go back, and Marcus's mother Consuelo watched Layla 3 days a week while a part-time daycare covered the other 2. It was a functional arrangement.
It worked.
What didn't work, and what I won't go into in great detail because the details belong to Layla someday and not to the internet right now, was the marriage itself. By the time Layla was 18 months old, Marcus and I were operating less like partners and more like 2 people who happened to share a zip code and a pediatrician. The warmth that had made him easy to love early on had receded into something that felt more like managed distance. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't volatile. He was just elsewhere. Consistently, quietly, persistently elsewhere. We tried. We saw a counselor for 7 months. The first year, I asked once to see the annual accounting the decree required. Marcus sent a one-page summary, amounts in, a tuition line item, a small enrichment line for the swim lessons Layla had started taking that fall. It looked right. The numbers were plausible. I filed it and moved on. The second year I asked again. Marcus said he'd forward it and then didn't, and I followed up twice, and then life accelerated. My firm went through a merger. I was managing a heavier caseload, Layla started first grade, and needed more logistical coordination, and I let it go. I told myself I'd circle back at year end. I didn't circle back at year end. Year 3, I didn't ask at all. I am telling you this not to perform accountability, but because it's honest, and because the story doesn't work if I pretend I was monitoring everything perfectly. I wasn't. I was busy, and I trusted the paper the decree was printed on more than I should have trusted the man who signed it. What I didn't know, what I had no reason to know, because the tuition bills weren't coming to me and Layla's classroom experience seemed unaffected, was that Marcus had stopped paying Birchwood Academy's tuition directly sometime in the second year. What he had done instead was pay the minimums required to keep Layla enrolled, letting a balance accumulate quietly in the background, while the fund he was supposedly administering reflected a very different story to everyone watching. The story he told his family was this: that Renata contributed to the fund every month, faithfully, and that he matched her contribution and managed it responsibly. That it was growing. That Layla's education was fully funded. That he was, in fact, the one who had built the structure that made it possible. At his family's Easter table, and at Christmas, and at his sister Gabriella's birthday party in July of year 3, and at his nephew's baptism the following spring, at all of these occasions, Marcus Bellamy was praised by his mother, his sisters, and his grandmother Estelle as a man who had handled a difficult divorce with grace and provided beautifully for his daughter. Consuelo told her sister, within earshot of Marcus's youngest sister Paloma, that Marcus had more integrity in one hand than most men have in their whole body. I know this because Paloma told me, 2 years later in a parking lot, with her hand over her mouth. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The phone call came on a Wednesday morning in late February. Layla was in second grade. I was at my desk by 7:15, working through a client reconciliation before my 8:30, when my cell rang with a number I recognized as Birchwood's main office line. The woman on the phone was the school's business administrator, a composed and apologetic woman named Ms. Drennan, who I had spoken to maybe twice in 3 years, both times about scheduling. She told me, in the careful tone of someone who has had this conversation before and doesn't enjoy it, that there was an outstanding balance on Layla's account. That the balance was significant. That the school had been in communication with the account administrator, Marcus, for several months and had received partial payments and assurances, but that the balance remained. That the school's policy required resolution by the end of the current billing period, which was 10 days away, or Layla's enrollment would need to be suspended pending payment. The balance was $11,400. I sat very still for what was probably 30 seconds. Then I thanked Ms. Drennan, told her I would be in touch by end of day, and hung up. My hands had gone cold. I pressed them flat against the desk, one at a time, and felt the surface temperature of the wood and tried to think clearly. The first thing I did was pull up my bank records. 4 years of automatic transfers. July, August, September. Every month, first of the month, $1,500, same account number, executed without exception. 48 transfers. $72,000. The transfers had cleared. Every single one. The second thing I did was call Marcus. He answered on the third ring, voice easy, no particular tension. I told him I'd received a call from Birchwood about an outstanding balance. There was a pause, brief, but I heard it, and then he said, "Yeah, there's been a timing thing. I've been handling it." I said, "Marcus, there's $11,000 outstanding. Ms. Drennan says she's been calling for months. It's a cash flow issue. It's temporary. I was going to tell you." When? Another pause. "I've got it handled, Renata." I said, "I'm going to pull the fund account statements. The decree entitles me to full accounting. I'd like those by Friday." His voice shifted. Not dramatically, not into anything you could point at and call defensive. More like a door that had been slightly open, moving an inch or two closed. "I'll put something together," he said. "This isn't what you're making it." I didn't argue. I thanked him and hung up. Then I called my attorney. Her name was Deirdre Chung, and she had represented me through the divorce with a combination of precision and absolute zero sentimentality that I had, at the time, found slightly exhausting. In retrospect, she was exactly what I needed, and I should have called her a year and a half earlier. I laid out what I knew: the school call, the balance, Marcus's response, the 4 years of transfers, the annual accounting I had received once and not followed up on. Deirdre was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You have documentation of the transfers?"
Complete.
48 months. And the original custody education agreement? In my files. Both signatures. Good, she said. Don't touch anything. Don't contact Marcus again about the fund. Send me your transfer records and the agreement today, and let me start pulling what we're entitled to under the decree. Under the terms of the supplemental agreement, Marcus was required to provide full accounting of the fund upon written request. Deirdre sent the written request that afternoon via certified mail and electronic delivery to his attorney of record. The request was specific: complete bank statements for the fund account, every transaction, from date of opening to present. Marcus's attorney acknowledged receipt. And then, for 8 days, nothing came. Those 8 days were among the quieter ones of my life, by which I mean that on the surface, very little changed. I went to work. I made Layla's lunches. I helped her with a book report on a chapter book about a girl who trained horses, and I sat on the edge of her bed while she read the last 2 chapters aloud to me because she said it was better that way. I paid the $11,400 directly to Birchwood myself because my daughter's enrollment was not going to be disrupted by whatever was happening in the background. I didn't tell Layla anything was wrong. I didn't tell my mother anything was wrong, though she called twice that week, and both times I could tell she was reading something in my voice that she didn't like. What I did, quietly and without announcing it, was build the file. I pulled every bank record I had showing the monthly transfers. I located the original custody education agreement, still in the same manila folder where I'd filed it 4 years earlier, slightly soft at the corners, but fully legible. I dug out the one annual accounting Marcus had provided in year 1 and read it carefully for the first time in 3 years. The numbers in that first accounting were fine. The account had opened with a small seed for Marcus. My first 4 transfers had arrived and were recorded, and there was a tuition disbursement that matched Birchwood's invoicing schedule for that year. Everything tracked, which was exactly why I hadn't looked harder. I made copies of everything. I organized it chronologically. I put the originals in a fireproof box and gave Deirdre a complete duplicate set. On day 9, Marcus's attorney sent over the fund account statements. Deirdre called me 40 minutes after receiving them. She didn't open with pleasantries. "The account has a current balance of $412, she said. "The total deposits from your transfers over 48 months are $72,000. I'm looking at the disbursement history now. Tuition payments to Birchwood are documented for the first 14 months. After that, the disbursements shift." She paused. "There are transfers out to what appears to be a personal account, recurring, some months twice." I was standing in my kitchen. Something behind my sternum tightened so sharply I had to press my hand against the counter. "How much?" I said. "I'm still tallying. But preliminary, well over $40,000 redirected to non-educational expenses. The school's outstanding balance tracks perfectly with the period when tuition payments stopped. He's been paying just enough to keep Layla enrolled." I said, "Is this what I think it is?" Deirdre said, "I think you should come in tomorrow. And I think you should not respond to any communication from Marcus or his family until we've talked." I said, "I understood." After I hung up, I stood at the kitchen counter for a while longer, not moving. The coffee maker finished its cycle, and the kitchen filled with the smell of the morning. Outside, a car went by slowly. Ordinary sounds, ordinary light. I was not going to cry about this. I had already decided that, somewhere in the previous 8 days, without consciously articulating it, there was going to be a point at which this would be handled, and it was going to be handled properly, and Marcus was going to have to account for what he had done with my daughter's money in front of more than just me. The question was only when. The one arrived because of Consuelo Bellamy's 65th birthday. Marcus's mother was turning 65 in the first week of April, and the family had planned a dinner at a banquet room in a Mexican restaurant in Aurora called La Fuente, a place the family had been going to for 20 years, where they knew the owners and where Estelle, who was 81 and no longer drove, liked the chili rellenos enough that she made the trip specifically for them. It was a significant birthday. The entire extended Bellamy family was expected. All three of Marcus's sisters, their husbands, the cousins, Estelle, Consuelo's two brothers, and their wives. And Layla was expected to be there because Layla was Consuelo's grandchild and had been going to Consuelo's birthday dinner since she was 2 years old. I want to be clear that I did not manufacture this setting. I did not engineer a public event to stage a confrontation. The dinner existed before any of this came to a head. Deirdre's process existed on its own timeline, moving through the required legal steps: formal demand letter, Marcus's initial non-response, escalation to enforcement proceedings, and those steps happened to resolve to a critical juncture the same week as the dinner. The way it unfolded was this. Marcus's attorney had been told, in writing, that if a resolution was not reached by April 3rd, Deirdre would be filing a motion for contempt of the custody decree and a petition for an accounting and enforcement action. April 3rd was a Monday. Consuelo's birthday dinner was the following Saturday. On April 3rd, Marcus did not respond. On April 4th, Deirdre filed. On April 5th, the motion was served. By April 9th, the Saturday of the birthday dinner, Marcus had received the papers, understood what they meant, and had, according to Deirdre, been in contact with his own attorney in a state of what she described, with professional neutrality, as some urgency. None of this was my doing, in the sense that I had simply done what the decree entitled me to do. But I am not going to pretend I didn't know that when Marcus walked into that birthday dinner, he was carrying something he hadn't told his family about yet. I brought Layla at 6:15, as the invitation said. I had told Deirdre I would be there, and that if Marcus chose to address anything in that setting, I would be prepared. She said, again professionally, stay calm. Let him talk first if he's going to talk. I said I would. Consuelo's birthday dinner was already warm and full when we arrived, mariachi music playing at a volume that suggested the family had requested the volume specifically, a long table in the back banquet room draped in yellow and white, Estelle already seated at the head of it with a glass of horchata and her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. Marcus's youngest sister Paloma was there, and his sister Gabriela and her husband Tomas, and the cousins who ranged from 7 to 22. It was, as Bellamy family gatherings always were, genuinely joyful in a way that made everything harder. Layla went straight to her grandmother and was folded into a hug. I greeted Consuelo, who kissed my cheek and told me I looked thin, which was her way of saying she was worried about me. I sat down at the far end of the table, next to Paloma, and accepted a glass of water. Marcus arrived 15 minutes later. He hugged his mother, kissed Estelle on the forehead, high-fived his nephew. He sat down 3 seats away from me and did not look at me directly. Dinner came. Plates went around. The table got louder. Consuelo's brother gave a toast in Spanish that made everyone laugh and made Estelle wave her hand dismissively and then smile. Layla ate 2 plates of rice and fell into conversation with Gabriela's youngest about a video game I'd never heard of. It was around 8:15, after the plates had been cleared and before the cake, that Gabriela's husband Tomas, who worked in commercial real estate and had a tendency toward conversational topics that required him to be the most informed person at the table, said something I hadn't anticipated. "Hey Marcus," he said, across the table, in the comfortable way of someone who has been to enough of these dinners to feel like family furniture. "Gabriela told me you got served this week. Something about the custody agreement." The table didn't go quiet. It was too loud for that, but the section of it nearest to Marcus shifted in register. Consuelo looked up. Paloma's fork paused. Marcus said, "It's a misunderstanding. It's being resolved." I did not say anything. Tomas, who clearly understood less about the situation than he thought, said, "What kind of misunderstanding?" And Marcus said, in the tone of someone deciding to get ahead of something, "Renata's filed a motion about the education fund. She's claiming there's an accounting issue. We're sorting it out." Consuelo said, gently, What kind of accounting issue, Mijo? Marcus said, It's paperwork. There's nothing to worry about. He did not look at me when he said it. Paloma, sitting next to me, said very quietly, not to the table, to me, Is that true? Is it paperwork? I said, also quietly, No. Here is the part one want you to understand about how the room changed. It didn't change because I made it change. It changed because Deirdre was there. I should explain that. Deirdre had not come to Consuelo's birthday dinner as a guest. She had come because Marcus's attorney had informed her, in a communication sent late Friday afternoon, that Marcus wished to attempt an informal resolution before the Monday hearing and had proposed a brief meeting Saturday evening. Deirdre, who had 30 years of family law experience and a very accurate read of what informal resolution meant in this context, had said she was available Saturday evening and had named the time and location that worked for her schedule, which happened to be La Fuente at 8:30, because that's when I had told her we'd likely be finishing cake. She arrived at the restaurant at 8:22 in a blazer, with a messenger bag over one shoulder and a document folder under her arm, and was shown to the banquet room by the host because I had told the host, when we arrived, that we might be joined by a colleague later. She appeared in the doorway of the banquet room at the moment Marcus was in the middle of explaining to his mother that the fund paperwork was being reviewed and that the situation was under control. Tomas saw her first and stopped talking. Consuelo turned. Marcus turned. Deirdre walked to an empty chair at the far side of the table, set down her bag, and placed the document folder in front of her. She did not sit down immediately. She looked at Marcus's attorney, who had, apparently, also been in the restaurant at the bar and who now appeared in the doorway looking like someone who had not expected the timing to work out quite this way, and she said, evenly, Your client wanted an informal resolution. This works. Marcus said, This isn't the place. Deirdre said, You chose the location. I chose the time. Consuelo said, very quietly, Marcus, what is happening? And Marcus, this is the part that I have replayed probably more times than any other part of the story. Marcus looked at his mother and said, It's complicated, Mama. There were expenses. I was going to pay it back. The table went still. Not performatively still. Actually still, the kind that happens when a room realizes it has just heard the sentence it was not supposed to hear. Estelle, from the head of the table, said one word in Spanish that I will not repeat here, but that Paloma later translated for me as roughly, Explain yourself. Deirdre opened the document folder. She didn't make a speech. That is not Deirdre's style, and it is also not what the moment needed. What she did was place 3 documents on the table, in a stack, and slide them to the center where multiple people could see them. The first was the Supplemental Custody Education Agreement. Both signatures. The notarization stamp. The second was a printed summary of the fund account statements, 48 months of deposits, the full disbursement history, and a line at the bottom noting the current balance. $412. The third was a one-page summary Deirdre had prepared herself, in plain language, of the total funds received, the total funds applied to documented educational expenses, and the total funds redirected to the personal account. The redirected amount was $44,380. Gabriella said, What is that? Deirdre said, Those are the fund statements. Every transaction. 48 months. Tomas had stopped talking entirely. He was looking at Marcus the way you look at someone when you realize you don't have the vocabulary for what you're seeing. Consuelo had her hands folded on the table in front of her. The skin across her knuckles was tight. She looked at the summary page for a long time, without speaking. Then she said, The money Renata sent. For Layla. It wasn't a question. Marcus said, I had expenses. I was covering things you don't know about. I was going to make it right. Consuelo said, The school called about unpaid fees? I said quietly, In February. I paid the balance directly. Her jaw shifted. She looked at me for a moment, and then she looked at her son, and the look she gave him was not one I have a word for. It wasn't rage. It was older and quieter than rage. Estelle had not moved from the head of the table. She was looking at the summary document that had migrated to her end of the table. Paloma had slid it to her without comment. She had her reading glasses on now. She read the page slowly, tracing the columns with one finger. Then she set it down and folded her glasses and put them in her pocket and looked at Marcus and did not say anything. "That's silence," was the verdict. The conversation that followed was not explosive. It was, in its way, worse than explosive would have been. Marcus tried, twice, to frame what had happened as a cash flow problem, a temporary shortfall, something that would have been resolved. His own attorney, who was now sitting at the edge of the room with the expression of a man who understood exactly how the next Monday morning was going to go, did not intervene. Gabriella asked him, point blank, how long this had been happening. He said it had started in the second year. She said, "So for 2.5 years you let us all think Renata wasn't pulling her weight." He said, "I didn't." She said, "At Easter, Marcus. You let Mama say those things at Easter." He didn't answer. Consuelo said, very quietly, "My grandchild's school money." She said it the way someone says something they are trying to understand by saying it out loud. "My grandchild's school money." She didn't say anything else to Marcus for the rest of the evening. I stayed until the cake was cut, because Layla needed to sing to her grandmother and blow out a candle on the slice they brought her, and I was not going to take that from either of them. Deirdre had already left, her work was done, and she had a sensible understanding of when presence becomes something other than useful. Marcus sat at the far end of the table with the look of someone who had understood, finally, that being caught is not the same as being forgiven. After cake, I helped Layla get her jacket and said goodbye to Consuelo, who held my hand for a moment longer than the goodbye required. She said, "You have always been a good mother to her." I said thank you. She squeezed my hand once and let go. Paloma walked us to my car. In the parking lot, she said, "I told her Consuelo last year that something felt off." She didn't want to hear it. She stopped. I should have pushed harder. I said, "You didn't know what you were looking at." She said, "I'm sorry." I said, "Take care of Estelle." Because Estelle was 81 and had just read a document in a birthday party banquet room that told her something about her grandson she hadn't wanted to know. That seemed like the thing that mattered most right then. Paloma nodded. She stood in the parking lot and watched us pull out. The Monday hearing was efficient, as contempt proceedings go when the documentation is thorough and the opposing counsel has already run out of arguments. The decree was clear. The fund had been misappropriated. Marcus was ordered to repay the redirected amount, $44,380, to a new account established directly in Layla's name, with me as the sole administrator, within a court-set schedule. Future educational disbursements under the revised decree would require dual signatures and receipts. There would be no fund account Marcus administered without oversight going forward. His attorney had spent the previous weekend negotiating the repayment terms down to something his client could theoretically meet. The judge was not interested in narrative. She was interested in the account number and the repayment timeline. It took 45 minutes. I closed the original fund account, the one Marcus had opened, the one I had been transferring into for 4 years, that same afternoon. The $412 remaining in it went into the new account. It felt like the most straightforward thing I had done in a long time. In the weeks after the hearing, things shifted in the way that things shift when a story has been told in a room, and everyone who is in that room now has to decide what to do with it. Consuelo called me 3 weeks after the birthday dinner. She asked about Layla, about her reading, about whether she'd finished the school year on track, about the summer. She asked in the way of someone who is still figuring out how to be in a situation, still finding the shape of a relationship that had just changed its geometry. I answered her questions. I told her Layla had made the honor roll. She made a sound on the phone that was something like relief. She did not mention Marcus. I did not ask. Gabriella texted me once, a short message, no preamble. "I want you to know I believe you, and I'm sorry it took us this long." I thanked her. I meant it. Paloma sent a longer message that I read twice and then saved in a folder I keep for things I want to remember. She said, among other things, that the family had accepted the story they were told because it was easier than asking questions, and that she thought about that a lot now. I thought that was an honest and costly thing to say, and I respected it. From Marcus. In the weeks following the hearing, I received 2 calls, both of which I let go to voicemail, and a text message that read, "I know you're angry. I'm asking you to think about what this does to Layla's relationship with my family. I read that message twice. Then, I set my phone down on the kitchen counter. My daughter's relationship with her grandmother was intact. Her relationship with her aunts was intact. Her relationship with Estelle, who had called once to tell me that she had included Layla in her prayers specifically, and that she was sorry for any unkind things she had ever let be said about me in her presence, was intact. What was not intact was the story that had been told about me for 4 years at holiday tables and birthday dinners, in the easy way that comfortable families tell stories about the difficult ex, the one who didn't step up, the one who had to be managed and credited and gently corrected. That story was done. Not because I had announced it or argued against it or sent anyone a message explaining their error. Because Deirdre had put 3 pieces of paper on a table in a birthday party banquet room and let the numbers do what numbers do. I didn't do anything after that except drive home. There are things I want to say about what I learned, but I want to say them plainly, and not in a way that sounds like a lesson I assembled from hindsight. The first is this. Keeping your own records is not paranoia. It's not distrust as a worldview. It's just the practice of knowing where things stand so that when something goes wrong, and something always eventually goes wrong, you are not beginning the process of understanding from zero. My mother knew this. She kept it in her yellow legal pad. I kept it in my bank records and in a manila folder in a fireproof box. The paper was there before I needed it. That's all. The second is harder to say, but true. I gave the situation benefit of the doubt long past the point where the situation had earned it. I know why. I didn't want the second part of the divorce, the part where you discover that the person you chose and who you hoped was managing the hard parts responsibly was not. That part is its own kind of grief, separate from the grief of the marriage itself. I avoided it by not looking. And the cost of not looking was paid partly by Layla's school, which had to carry an $11,000 balance for months while chasing a man who was giving them the minimum necessary to keep the problem from becoming visible. I paid that balance. It was the right thing to do. But I should have been looking earlier. The third thing I want to say is about Layla. She knows now the broad shape of what happened. Not the details. She doesn't need the details, and she won't for a while. But she knows that there was money set aside for her education, and that there was a problem with it, and that has been fixed. She knows that her grandmother called. She knows that her aunts are still her aunts. She asked me once, in the particular sideways manner of a child asking a thing she isn't sure she's allowed to ask, whether I was angry at her dad. I thought about that for a moment. I said honestly, I was for a while. And then I took care of it and now I'm mostly just done with it. Not for her dad's sake. For mine. She thought about that. Then she went back to her book. She's a reader, my daughter. She's going to be all right. If any of this sounds familiar to you, if you are the one who has been quietly sending the money, keeping the records, trusting a paper agreement while someone else built a different story around it, here is what I want you to hear. The record exists. The transfers happened. The account statements are there. You don't have to argue the story. You just have to open the folder. That's my story. A folder, a transfer record, and 45 minutes in front of a judge. If you've ever been the one quietly keeping the receipts while someone else took the credit, I want to hear about it. Drop it in the comments. What would you have done when that school called? Would you have waited? Or would you have moved immediately? Drop your answer in the comments. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.